Alright, so in this video, I'm going to tier the Western Conference. I kind of rearranged the order of teams that I had that I ranked because I thought about it a little bit more. I kind of went on record on a podcast about my Western Conference tiers, and I made a few changes, and this is going to be the final preseason tier list of the Western Conference heading into the season. Again, like with the Eastern Conference, I have 6 tiers, as you can see up here on the video. I have contenders. Tier 2 is contenders with a question mark, meaning teams that could win the conference if they answer some concerns and questions that I have, or if things break right. Tier 3 is the 1 or 2 pieces away from being moved into Tier 2. Tier 4 is the play-in. Obviously, with the whole play-in tournament, that factors in a new set of rules. Tier 5, like with the Eastern Conference, play-in game hunting. And then Tier 6 is lottery hunting. So let's get into it. So I don't know how controversial this will be right off the bat, but starting with Tier 1, the first team that I have in contenders is the Phoenix Suns. Now, I know the Suns had a little bit of health luck in their finals run, but what team that goes to the finals doesn't have a lucky break or two? The Suns are bona fide contenders, despite their owner continuing to do dumb owner things that he has done in the past, like not extend DeAndre Ayton, but somehow wanting to extend Landry Shamet, who they just traded for over the summer. But regardless, the Suns have the infrastructure, they have returning players coming back, another year of continuity. This team is going to be really freaking good. I'm looking for Devin Booker to make another leap, hopefully another leap as a three-point shooter, especially off the dribble. But I have the Suns here at 1. Didn't think that initially when the season ended, but after some of the moves and looking at the injury landscape of some teams, I think the Suns are clearly the number 1 team in the West going into the season. Number 2, and this also might be controversial, but I'm factoring in continuity, health, and the team with the less amount of question marks going into this season, the Utah Jazz. Now, the Jazz had a disgraceful choke job in the Clippers series. They should have beaten the Clippers without Kawhi Leonard. They really blew the Game 6 where they got eliminated. They blew like a 25-point lead. And the Jazz still have some questions, but I think all of that can be erased if Donovan Mitchell takes that final leap into superstardom to where he's so good that the questions I have about the Jazz, like Mike Conley's health concerns, can Bojan Bogdanovic and Joe Ingles hold up another year as they get older, and Rudy Gobert's offensive struggles in the playoffs, all of those would be eliminated to me if Donovan Mitchell takes the next step into superstardom, and I feel like that's going to happen over the next year or two. But the problem is the Jazz's championship contender status window is closing low-key, and they might be under some pressure that not a lot of people realize since they've been together for so long. But I still think the Jazz will have the infrastructure, the system, the number of threes they're about to take. I think the Rudy Gay signing gives the Jazz more optionality in terms of committing to small ball and putting out more versatile lineups. But despite the Jazz falling short of expectations in the playoffs, I expect them to be in the mix again as a contender. So the Jazz are number 2 for me. Moving on to Tier 2, contenders with a question mark. At the very top of this list, and I think there's kind of a gap between this team and the 3 teams I have in this tier. I think the Los Angeles Lakers are at the top of this tier. Now look, anytime you have LeBron James and Anthony Davis, the Lakers are going to be a contender no matter what, but there are legitimate concerns and legitimate positives to adding Russell Westbrook to your team, but there are fit questions. I have crunch time lineup questions, if Russell Westbrook is actually going to let LeBron have the ball in his hands. Is he going to commit to being an off-ball player more, cutting more, playing better defense? Those are things we've been asking for Russell Westbrook for years, and it hasn't happened. I think the Lakers have lineup stuff to figure out. Is Anthony Davis going to play center more often? Looks like they're going to continue to start with the 2 big lineup, which I hate, especially if you're talking about providing optimal spacing for Russell Westbrook, who can't shoot. But the Lakers have a lot of talent. They have a lot of talented guards they got on the minimum, guys coming off the bench. I think on paper, it looks, the depth, especially on the bench, looks more talented, but I still have my fit concerns about the Lakers, and I just have to see it. So I have the Lakers here as a contender with a question mark at the very top of tier 2. Next team I have on this list is the Golden State Warriors. If you watched my video back in August, I was very high on the Warriors offseason. I think Steph Curry is in the tier 1 still franchise player category, the very top of the tier with, LeBron, Kevin Durant, and Giannis. With Draymond coming back, with Klay Thompson coming back sometime maybe in late December or January, with the Warriors' low-risk, high-reward signings that they did in the offseason with Otto Porter, Nemanja Bjelica, drafting Moses Moody, adding a high-upside player like Jonathan Kuminga, and James Wiseman isn't even back yet. But then you add the improvement of Jordan Poole, who I think is going to be a strong favorite for most improved player. I think the Warriors have a lot of talent. They have more shooting than they've had in the last 2 years around Stephen Curry. And with Klay Thompson coming back, that's going to provide more spacing. And I think this Warriors team is going to be really, really fucking good if everything breaks right, if they stay healthy, and if Klay Thompson is even like 80% of himself. Next up is the Los Angeles Clippers. I still like the talent on this Clippers roster, and I still think the world of Paul George, but we do have to acknowledge that they don't have Kawhi Leonard. So my question with them and why they're in this tier is Kawhi Leonard going to come back this year? Is he actually going to communicate with the team and let him know when he's coming back? Because if Kawhi doesn't come back, then you can scratch the Clippers from contendership. But in terms of Paul George, I think he can be a dark horse MVP type of candidate, taking risk on Justice Winslow and retooling the roster a little bit, bringing back Reggie Jackson. We'll see how the Eric Bledsoe things plays out, but we always say that about Eric Bledsoe. I think the Clippers are still a really good team. They still have a good coach, and the Clippers are legitimately a good organization with a good front office. I think the Clippers are still going to be really good in the West, and if Kawhi comes back by the playoffs and he actually looks good, if he ever comes back, then the Clippers, they're absolutely contenders. And in that same vein, I have the Nuggets ranked next in this tier. The Jamal Murray injury hurts a lot, but they still have Nikola Jokic, the reigning league MVP. Aaron Gordon just signed an extension. They're probably going to be looking for a bit more out of Aaron Gordon offensively than he might be capable of. We'll see. Maybe Michael Porter Jr. takes another leap, but that's one of the questions I want to see. Is Michael Porter Jr. ready to take the next step as a ball handler, as somebody who could score off the dribble as opposed to being a catch and shoot guy and a cutter? He improved defensively, but we're looking for the next step in Michael Porter Jr., who is a special and fantastic talent. I like some of the fringe signings the Nuggets made, like getting Jeff Green and JaMychal Green. We'll see with the Nuggets. They still have a lot of talent, so like the Clippers, they're still in the mix in the Western Conference and definitely in the mix for Tier 2. Tier 3, the 1 or 2 pieces away, I'm going with the Dallas Mavericks, ranked here at 7th. There could be a chance that Luka Doncic just has a 2007 LeBron type of season or a 2009 type of LeBron season where he just straight up carries the Mavs. But I don't like that they didn't get an extra ball handler. I still question if Porzingis is ever going to reach even 70% of the player he was in New York. Also, the big stinky elephant in the room is Jason Kidd. And I don't think Jason Kidd is a good coach. He might be able to connect with Luka at a mental level in terms of star power and seeing the floor the same way as Luka, because great players see the floor differently. But that's about all the credit I'm going to give Kidd for as a coach. I have too many questions about the Mavericks. The one constant, though, that will make me look like an idiot by the end of the season will be Luka, who will probably be in the MVP discussion if he takes another leap, becomes more efficient, and carries this team. Next on my list is the Portland Trailblazers, and I feel like we kind of already know the story with the Blazers. They still have the 3-guard lineup of McCollum, Lillard, and Powell. I love the trade that they did for Larry Nance Jr. in the offseason when they got in that 3-team deal with the Bulls and the Cavs. But will Larry Nance Jr. stay healthy? Because other than that, I hated the Blazers offseason before that. Upgrading on the fringes on the bench doesn't really do much for me in terms of what I think the Blazers are as a team. But Larry Nance Jr. does add defense and playmaking from the big position. Yusuf Nurkic is a solid center. Of course, Robert Covington, one of the best off-ball defenders in the NBA, average on ball, but he still contributes immensely to this Blazers team. The Blazers are just an injury or two away from this becoming a shit show and Damian Lillard requesting out. I'm just not high on this Blazers team. They're going to be very good offensively, and they're going to be very terrible defensively. And I think it's just going to be the same story, even though they have a new head coach in Chauncey Billups, who I also have questions about. So just too many questions on the Blazers, and I think they're one or two legitimate fitting pieces away from actually contending. Then next up, we have the Tier 4, which is the play-in, and right here at number 9, I'm putting the Sacramento Kings here. I think the Kings have a lot of talent across the roster. They have a lot of three-guard lineups that I like that they can put out there, especially with the addition of Davion Mitchell. I think that gives the Kings a different type of guard among the many that they have, but this should be the year that they make the play-in. If they don't, I think it's an abject failure on the part of head coach Luke Walton because the Kings have a lot of talent. Then number 10 here, I have the Memphis Grizzlies. The star power of Ja Morant, we don't know what Jaren Jackson Jr. is going to be, but the star power of Ja Morant is mainly the reason why they are here. Did not like the offseason that the Grizzlies had, although they still have pretty much every one of draft Twitter's prospects that they love. I still like Desmond Bane, obviously Xavier Tillman. Maybe Brandon Clark can bounce back from a down second year. Jackson hopefully can stay healthy, especially after signing that extension yesterday. But I think losing Jonas Valanciunas, who I thought was the Grizzlies' best player last year, and replacing him with Steven Adams, who was not good in New Orleans and is significantly worse than Valanciunas at this point in their careers, was a downgrade. But the Grizzlies still have enough talent to where I think they can still make the play-in as the 10th seed. I just think they took a step back talent-wise from last year. Then in Tier 5, we're going to go over the teams that will be in the hunt for the play-in game. Number 11 here, I have the Timberwolves. I think the Timberwolves are the most talented out of these teams that I'm going to list in Tier 5. They have the best player in Karl Anthony Towns. I really think there's no reason that the Wolves shouldn't be in contention for the play-in, but they're the Wolves. We'll see. I like Chris Finch as a coach. Karl Anthony Towns is obviously the best player out of the teams I'm going to name next, so that's why I think the Wolves have an outside shot of making the play-in. I honestly would not be surprised at all if they passed the Grizzlies or the Kings for the 9th and 10th spots, but as it stands right now, that's where I have the Wolves. Next up is the New Orleans Pelicans, and look, the Zion injury, once again, we're talking about Zion being injured. It's a foot fracture, and a foot fracture on a dude that big is scary. I also did not like the offseason that the Pelicans had. Bravo, David Griffin. You got rid of the bad contracts of Bledsoe and Steven Adams, contracts you should not have signed in the first place. Did not like how the Lonzo Ball thing played out. Devontae Graham is a solid guard. I like his shooting ability, and he's underrated as a playmaker, but that's not going to be enough. But at least we get to see some of the Pelicans' young talent develop, like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, like Kira Lewis Jr. Jackson Hayes really came on towards the end of last season. I think he's going to take another leap this year. The Pelicans still have young talent, but to me, they got worse. I just don't see the Pelicans being better than the Timberwolves, the Grizzlies, or the Kings as it stands right now. If Zion was healthy going into the season, it'd be a different story, but that's not the case right now. And then, of course, we have the Spurs here, and it's just going to be all run and gun for the Spurs with DeJounte Murray, Lonnie Walker, Keldon Johnson. The list just goes on with the young talent the Spurs have, especially after the departure of DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge being bought out last year. It seems like the Spurs are just finally moving towards the youth movement, especially as they transition over the next few years from the Greg Popovich era, which there have been rumors and reports of his impending retirement over the next few years. But those are my teams in the Tier 5. And then Tier 6 with lottery hunting, we have the Thunder and the Rockets, and if you're a draft nerd or like a lot of young prospects that are on the Thunder and Rockets, I imagine you're going to be watching a lot of games of them this year. I know I'm going to be watching a lot of Rockets games because I like Jalen Green, I like Kevin Porter Jr., Jason Tate is going to be fun. Christian Wood is fun, but the Rockets just aren't going to be good. And the same kind of applies to the Thunder. I like in the preseason that we've seen flashes of how a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Josh Giddey, and Poku lineup can work out, but the Thunder are still really raw and young, and they're still going to be tanking. So these two teams are going to be in the lottery hunting tier, which is tier 6. So those are all of my tiers for the Western Conference. Leave a comment below if you disagree with any of these. Just explain your reason why. We can have a civil conversation about it. But this is my Western Conference tier as it stands. I'll probably update both the East and the West tiers as the season goes along. We'll see. But like with the last video, I'm going to be going back to this video at the end of the season just to see how the tier list held up. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next video where I predict NBA awards.